Okay, look, I will whiz through the questions here, but I think also in a digital universe, it's quite nice every now and then to have a good old-fashioned roaming mic and somebody with their hands up making more of a comment than a question, if you don't mind. So can I invite anybody in the room who wants to ask a question to stick your hand up, and Vicky will come and find you. And before we get to that, let me see. Tell you what, I guess first question that's interesting is, because I think it's important for each constituency to take responsibility for the things that they can do to make the world better, I think I'd be really interested to hear from people involved in funders, government and the NHS. If you've any thoughts on what funders, government and the NHS can do to help make sure that we get data platforms that are safe and transparent and useful. And in particular, perhaps Tarek, since you came to this world quite late in life.
Yes. Thanks, Ben. I think a lot that funders can do in this space. I think the first thing to realize is in this world of sort of academic public interest technology, you don't have the forces of a market that you may do naturally when it comes to kind of commercial technology. So I do think funders, both private funders like Wellcome and public funders that you find in the government, have a role to sort of do some market shaping, if you like. And that requires thinking carefully about a principled approach to how we want this technology to work, who it benefits, standards, and the like. So, for instance, Ming mentioned the National Data Library. A couple of weeks ago, Wellcome launched a white paper competition for technical visions and architectures for what a future National Data Library could look like. So I think that's an important role for funders like us to kind of set out a challenge for the best minds in the country to come forward with these sort of great sort of technical visions. So that's one, that sort of market shaping bit. And the second bit I'll just say is it's a bit of an obvious one. It's funding, but also how we fund. So there's a reason why we've chosen to fund Open Safely over 7 years. Like long-term stable funding is crucial for infrastructure. We can't be funding things in sort of 12-month bursts. None of you would use Open Safely if you thought it was going to be switched off at Christmas, right? Long-term sustainable funding.
I must say, Open Safely was regularly switched off at Christmas throughout much of its life, and people carried on using it, and thank you all. Ming.
Switching it off? No, I guess there are things around the data standards, making sure that it's open as much as possible, the security standards as well. But I think it's really important, as Tarek says, is kind of funding in the longer term and making the case that it can be. And in the public sector at the moment, it's quite difficult. But I'm fingers crossed we have done that. And then making sure that, somebody said in a discussion I had the other day, stopping data being in solid state to liquid state. How do you do that is really about making sure that you make it as frictionless as possible for the data to flow and to be linked.
I must say, actually, long-term funding is great and very welcome, of course. But one of the really fantastic things about both Wellcome and NHS England has been that it's been such uncomplicated funding and it's come without menaces. Sometimes you find funders want a very detailed description of exactly what you're going to do in each month on a Gantt chart. And with Wellcome, I think they've really refreshingly recognised that where there is a team with a track record, as long as you share the overarching aims, to have the freedom on how you meet those aims has been really fantastic. And then similarly with NHS England.
Did you miss the memo?
Sorry?
Did you miss the memo, Ben?
Well, no, but almost conversely with NHS England, it's a very uncomplicated arrangement where £3.5 million a year pays for 50 seats per year working in Open Safely, which is comparable to many other platforms. And I think it's just a really good, direct and uncomplicated way of working. So I will turn to the magical internet thing.
And there's a hand waving as well.
Oh, and there's a hand. Okay, well, in that case, Chad, go.
Yes, hi, Ben. You know what I'm going to ask. So I'm a big fan of Open Safety. I'm at University of Manchester, Chad van Staar. I'm also involved in the Northwest Secure Data Environment, a big NHS initiative. My question is, how can we bring the two, Open Safely and the SDE, together better?
Who's that question to?
NHS England?
Thank you. There is a piece of work at the moment where we're looking as part of the, I mentioned it earlier on, the Health Data Research Service, to link the SDEs with the national SDE, and as part of that work, we're linking with Open Safely. So that's underway.
The regional SDs, I think, are a really interesting project. My recommendation in my excessively long review to Secretary of State was to set up these initiatives, but my recommendation was 3 tiny ones, each with a small footprint, well-resourced to build templates and teams and working practices and expand out slowly. I think Open Safely could do a lot to do federated analysis of the GP data and HES that sits in those environments, and we'd always be very keen to work with anyone in any of the regional SDEs to do that. I think the top clicked question is actually refreshingly a sort of reasonably technical infrastructure one, which I'll give to you, I think, Seb, which is, can you explain how linkages, for example, with the NHS talking treatments data, will work in practice given the Open Safely model? For example, where is the linkage undertaken, and are there particular requirements to enable that data set to be linked?
Yeah, so that's an interesting example, actually. So the way linkage works at the moment in Open Safely is we do some safe, secure stuff to pseudonymize the data. Let's take EMIS, for example, at either of the 2 places the GP data currently lives, and the third party do the safe pseudonymization. They talk to each other to do that. We don't get involved. And then just the patients that match that part of the population, their data flows into, say, the EMIS wrapper, and they're linked in situ there. And that's how it works at the moment. And that's what we'll be doing for the talking therapies, first of all. But it isn't really what we want to do. That was a pragmatic choice about how we would do linkage 4 years ago, and it's not really what we want to be doing going forwards. So the vision going forwards, which we've sort of agreed in principle with NHS England as well, is to do it in a more truly federated way. And we've got quite a few ideas about how to kind of do that in incremental steps, but fundamentally it will mean just the very minimum amount of data flowing to a secure location, and that could be a neutral third-party space. It could be still in situ somewhere that's hosted by EMIS, for example, but something with a different governance wrapper and that only exists and is linked for the time necessary for the study to be carried out. So that's the vision, but initially it's going to be in place.
I should say that model of preparing and minimizing the data in situ in the source data center and then bringing over only what you need for each project is something that we do have a grant application in with MRC for at the moment. We've been thinking about radical transparency on grant apps, just publish all the grant apps, but it's hard to think of a way to do that that wouldn't make funders feel sad. Do we have any more questions in the room? All right, in that case, I will interrogate the box. I'm sorry you can't see this.
Can I say something about useful data?
Yes.
So I think one of your questions was also about what's the most useful data. And I should say in mental health, for almost all of my life, the only data we've really had is what I would call input data. It's how many people get X intervention and how long they wait for it. But that isn't really very helpful data unless you know that X works. And the unique thing I think that we're moving towards now in mental health, and it's really wonderful, is starting to, across different sectors, collect actual outcome data to see whether people improve or not. We've obviously, one reason for bringing NHS talking therapies data in as the first example of mental health is because we get outcome data on 98% of people. But the new mental health services in schools are also collecting very large amounts of data. We hope with time that'll come in. And in other sectors of mental health, we're moving in that way with a lot of support from the Royal College of Psychiatrists. So I think we're at a sort of cusp where we're moving from data which actually wasn't that useful for policy to data which, if you combine the input with the outcome, you can really drive policy in a way which improves the health of the nation.
I think that's incredibly important. There's a question here that I think I would like to slightly adapt. The question is, as Open Safely moves beyond a COVID focus to cover all areas of health and, in principle, social care, how will it navigate the involvement of groups with vested interest in which research does and doesn't happen and how it's reported? Now, of course, the simple story is that NHS England at the moment pays for 50 seats a year. They are currently the only funder paying for seats per year, and they make decisions about who accesses. But I'd really like to hear, in particular, from Mark and from Nicola, how would you like those questions to be negotiated? How would you like us to navigate as a community the questions of who does and doesn't get access?
Can I go first? Just because
I'd be delighted if you go first.
I can touch on how we've been approaching the use of data for pandemic purposes first and use that as a stepping stone really to. So this isn't using Open Safely, but this is using a pandemic data set which is used for is the GP data for the GPES data for pandemic planning and research. And the profession was on board at the beginning of this with the pandemic, and I sit on the profession advisory group where we review the data sharing applications. And essentially, we just have a small checklist that we form to see whether there's a COVID purpose, whether it's the best use of data, avoiding dissemination. Now, technologies have improved. There is no real reason we feel that data should be sent so that it ends up on people's laptops, for example, or memory sticks, so it could get left on a train by mistake. That time has passed. At the beginning of the pandemic, perhaps that may have been the only way to do immediate research, but we've moved on from that. So we have our own way of assessing these applications just to check that there's a good purpose and that there's no surprises and it's not something that would cause, from us as patients, would cause concern to us and therefore to our patients, whether it would affect them. So we've gone slowly. And if that's opened up to wider purposes, I'm just going to say a slow approach. Let's see what comes in. Let's see what the feedback is. Patients need to be involved. There's an engagement going on at the moment with NHS England that will be going out to the country to see about the use of GP data in wider circumstances. It would be very good to see what the feedback from that is and to have an iterative approach and to take things slowly. What you don't want to do is do something that hits the headlines and then damages trust. So it may be better to go a little slower than some may want, but they do need to push, because if there's no pushing, then nothing happens. So people are pushing and we may be reining things back, especially with the collective action, which I mentioned. We need a properly funded general practice. So remember that it's the GPs who are, at the moment, the data controllers and who are feeding these records. And there needs to be good accuracy in the coding. So perhaps we need to have some sort of educational resource for GPs and some funded time so that we can spend more time typing in the records. But yes, an iterative approach. So that's my simple suggestion.
So the question was around what we want to see about the access arrangements.
Well, in particular, the question around kind of prioritising which projects do and don't get access.
Yeah. I mean, for me, sort of, from a national perspective, I don't think it's for me to be prescriptive, or it isn't for me to be prescriptive about how exactly these things would be structured. But I suppose I have concerns that public involvement in decision-making is not only there, but it's meaningful. And I think, actually, these things take quite a bit of resourcing. And you, I think, used the word something about things not being performative, actually, Ben, earlier. And I think that's really, really important, that whatever arrangements we end up with, that the decision-making about access has public and lay involvement that is sufficiently resourced, that those people are resourced in themselves to be able to really scrutinise and challenge rather than rubber stamp and do something performative or virtue signalling about the fact that they're on a committee, for example. So I think there are questions about resourcing and scale, and slightly not so much around specifics of data access for particular requests, but I suppose there is something important with the new government. I hope they will remain committed to ongoing public involvement and public dialogue about data use is ongoing, because I think it's very important not to see public deliberation and public involvement as sort of one-off events, because obviously as time goes on, the opportunities from data use change, the risks may change, the technology changes, and so do social attitudes. You know, the public may not feel how they do now in 5-10 years' time around particular potential uses of data, for example. So I think there's that question about data access and resourcing it properly in terms of public involvement, but there's also doing that within a context of wider public involvement and public deliberation that's ongoing and not seen as a sort of one-off exercise.
Look, I have a sacred duty here that parallels that of the National Data Guardian, which is to get you to warm white wine as quickly as possible. There is one more question in the room, I think, which comes from Cameron, Editor-in-Chief of BMJ, and also Peter. Could I ask you to come up just to the edge?
Thank you very much. It's a related question to what you've been discussing, and no one's mentioned, I didn't mention it either, the P words. A lot's been discussed about trust and building trust, ensuring trust. How can we ensure that there is the necessary trust when we're working with a company like Palantir, which professionals and the public, whatever the safeguards are in place, do not trust? How are we going to overcome that?
I guess inevitably that question goes to a combination of perhaps Mark and Ming. Mark?
So there are lots of different data programs on the go at the moment, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, but you have a different technology supplier to the one beginning with P.
Oh, well, I mean, in Open Safely, we use anything that works. So we don't make our own hard drives. We pick things up that exist, whether it's tools built by other people or services or data centers, and we assemble them together into functioning services. But no, you're right, we don't work with that particular supplier, which I think does sort of everything all in one go.
I guess from my perspective, we've done quite a lot of public engagement. It's never black or white, but it's actually what we do with the data and the benefit that we have and the way that we've created that platform to be as open as possible, right? So I think it's in the context of what we're trying to do with Open Safely, they're two different things, as Mark said, and we're not cross-contaminating the platforms. And also the use of the Federated Data Platform is actually bringing benefits for the NHS, and that's by which it will stand. You know, the benefits both to patients and to the service. So I don't think that all they do is provide the technology that we use. I'm not sure one way or the other that you can judge it in that way. Maybe quite naive of me to say that, but I think we're standing by the fact that they are bringing benefits for the NHS in terms of operational uses. And that's, the proof will be in the pudding, because actually we're improving care for patients. That's what I'm here for. So that's my opinion. I'm not prescribing one way or the other to the politics of it all, but we procured it in an open, transparent procurement, and they're delivering.
Nicola, you waved.
I waved because I felt compelled to contribute to this, because it's something obviously that in my role I've spent a lot of time thinking about over the last few years, and the concerns that were raised in the public and around the profession, around Palantir specifically, but the wider questions they spoke to anyway. And so although I hate self-publicity, I mean, I can't stand it, I can't bear it, we did do a very, I hope it was timely, and I think it was helpful, blog last summer that is still available on our government website. So if anybody's interested in reading it, if you search for National Data Guardian on Gov.uk, it will still be there. And I think through that, we went through a process of thinking through very carefully what questions we thought the public and professionals needed answering in relation to this. And I have to say, I was very pleased by the fact that I felt NHS England did actually, and the Department of Health did listen very carefully to those suggestions and those questions we raised. So it's not a quick answer, and I'm very mindful of Ben and his task to get us to warm white wine. But I think it's something that we have thought about as an independent advisor and my panel and my team very carefully in terms of how to respond to those professional public concerns. And I think the system has worked very hard to do so. And proof is in the pudding about how it works, and obviously people will have their own views about whether their own questions have been answered. But I think a lot of work and effort has gone into that.
Look, I think these are tricky and controversial questions in some respects, but today we're here to talk about Open Safely and the community and what it's built. And in particular, we have spent a lot of our time in the past thinking and commentating on the challenges in data infrastructure. And what we set out to do really in Open Safely was to go beyond talking and instead to build something that was in the image that we thought that platforms should look like. And it's been really fantastic to see so much support for that from our users, from you, and from our panel. So thank you very much all. Okay, and finally, before we get to the warm white wine, you will doubtless be aware that there are two brands, two logos here. One is Open Safely and the Open Safely platform, and the other is the Bennett Institute for Applied Data Science. Now, up until 2022, we were the data lab at the University of Oxford. In fact, we weren't really anything. It turns out when you go to a university, you can just say, now I run a thing, it has a name. And then you go, oh, well, who runs it? And you go, well, actually, let's say I'm the director, and there we go. And that's how the data lab happened, and we grew. And when we were at the stage of being maybe 8 or 10 people, we first met Peter Bennett, who was introduced to us by somebody who had previously been an epidemiologist at London School of Hygiene and was by then working at the Peter Bennett Foundation. Over time, we spent more and more time together in conversation about the different things we could do. And as I think you can doubtless tell, Peter decided with his foundation that he would make a very substantial investment in what has now become the Bennett Institute for Applied Data Science. I should say it's no small thing to have somebody back you like this. This is a really challenging space to work in. And I think some of you can appreciate that we haven't necessarily always taken the convenience path. We've also been quite bullish about the money that we will and will not take. And we don't take money to build what we think are bad ideas. We want to follow the amber lights, because there are never green lights, in the desired direction of travel. And it was Peter's investment that really put a rocket under that. It allowed us to make our own decisions about whether we wanted to move in advance of what funders would tolerate and in advance of what funders were excited by. But it also brought an enormous amount of emotional succor. It can be difficult to get things going, and you can sometimes feel like you're a little bit alone. I know that sounds ridiculous when there are now 60 of us in the Bennett Institute. But it was Peter's faith in our work that was particularly motivating. So, some last words from Peter Bennett.
Thank you, Ben. It's very, very kind. When I met Ben, it didn't take me long to make my mind up that this was somebody who was likely to achieve whatever he set out to achieve. And that's pretty important as a funder, I think, to think that whatever he thought he would do, he would have the ability, but also hopefully the support of the university to take that forward. When we talked originally, Ben, you were working in the medical department at Oxford, which is a very big and substantial department within Oxford. And I think the initial discussions around improving health were substantial, but I know that we wanted to, both of us, look at things beyond health. So the Institute's actually called the Applied Data Science, and that's because we thought that information such as data could be used not just around health, but around education, around social services, around all the things that that the government and the private sector work on. So I hope we'll see a little bit more of that. Today has been mainly about health, but the use of data to improve quality of life beyond health, I think is substantial, and I'm really excited to look forward to where that may go with education and social services over the coming years. So anyway, thank you.
Bravo. Well, look, just one more thing from me before the warm white wine. It has been fantastic to see so many people here today who do already work with us. And what we would always like to see is more people to come and work with us. And there are many ways in which you can do that. You can come and work with the Open Safely tools as they're built on top of GP data. So use the NHS England Open Safely GP data service. You can also contribute to the Open Safely collaborative code. And the beauty of the Open Safely platform, the beauty of the way that we designed it and then built it, is that every single act that is perpetrated by every single user is captured and shared in the most beneficent way to the whole community. So every user contributes code. Thirdly, and I say this with some trepidation because it's not a tiny task, but if you have a data center with data in it, whether it's NHS GP data or HES or other forms of data, come and talk to us about how to build our federated analytics tools in your data center. We have an enormous and proven technical delivery team, and we have 100 completed outputs from this platform to show for it from 181 projects in 31 different organizations. And lastly, of course, with painful inevitability, I must say, fund us. It's an important way of working with us. Fund us, but fund us in the right way. Work with us to identify the right aims and objectives for your community and for your constituency, and talk to us about how we can help you meet your needs. About half of you are coming tomorrow for the deep technical workshops. The one thing I really encourage you to do after the white wine on the tube on the way home is, somebody give me a book. Can I steal a book? So this book is a thing of great beauty and majesty. And the things that you can see in this book include a description of the data that you can find in the platform, a description of things like the co-piloting service, the user support, which we haven't talked about at all today, but a huge part of our community is people who are experienced users of Open Safely sitting down with new users. And this practical meat and drink of how you get a platform up and running and productive is something that we're really keen not just to have witnessed by all of you, but also it's something we're really keen to share. We've got a lot of knowledge and experience to share with other people who are trying to build performant platforms that deliver high volumes of outputs. You can also see in here a lot about Urkel, about how we've set out to produce new standardized ways of working with electronic health records data. And in particular, you can see, and these weren't particularly solicited or edited by us, I must say, you can see the user stories where we went to people and said, tell us about the results of your cool study. And I absolutely swear they all came back going, yeah, I'll tell you about the results of my study, but also let me tell you what it was like working with Open Safely, working with Urkel. It's a pain initially to have to write your code up front. I'm used to mucking around in a point and click thing, but actually that discipline is really powerful. And then at the end of the book, you can see two critically important things. First of all, you can see what's next. And second of all, you can see, and I will show it to you again, this beautiful pullout. We couldn't fit all of the papers produced by our community inside this book. There are so many papers that we had to print them in a teeny tiny little font on this enormous pullout and on both sides. And that's what a performative platform really looks like. And so please join me in applauding the team that built the platform for everyone to use. Bravo.